Hello, everybody. How are we all doing today? My name is Dave. I'm the Chief Content Officer with WhiteFlag, and we are here with Dr. Roshni Patel and Dr. Jessica LoPresti to answer some more questions for us. As always, they give fantastic answers. These are questions that people within the company had, people on social media have had, questions that I have personally thought of that I get to take advantage of because I'm the one hosting this thing. Questions from all over for things that we want to know. And the theme of the episode today is discussing relationships. Before we get started, I would love for each of you to give like a general opening statement about what you find to be the most beneficial thing in a relationship. You know, if you could give one gift to every relationship in the world, what would that one gift be? Dr. Patel, we can start with you.
I think the answer to that is a little bit in the eyes of the beholder. For me personally, I think it is communication. I think clean communication usually will make for healthy relationships, at least for me, in pretty much every facet of my life, right? So whether it's work or family or friends, I find I am the most troubled when I feel lost because there wasn't a clean communication back and forth. So I'm gonna go with communication.
Good choice.
So I want to second Dr. Patel in communication, and I'll sort of ante up with trying to choose between two things. Well, I'll ante up with compassion. I think that that is a really important aspect of relationships. And what I will say more importantly is compassion for ourselves in the context of relationships. I think that the stakes are often high in our relationships, but having compassion for the mistakes that we make and having compassion for the times that we falter or maybe aren't the type of person we want to be is really important and allows us to come back.
Great answers. Yeah, and I feel like compassion is also the starting line for whether or not there will be trust issues or vulnerability issues. Most of the time, people are afraid to open up or admit mistakes or claim guilt because they know that it's just going to lead to something that they have to defend later. Compassion and communication, wonderful choices. Speaking of fantastic relationships, I don't think a perfect relationship exists. And we kind of discussed what you consider to be the priorities. What would you say are just the general foundations, the general groundwork needed for the start of a relationship to be able to function correctly?
This is another good question. One thing that I'll say about sort of setting the foundation for a relationship is that, whenever I'm beginning a relationship, I always want to be careful not to set expectations in that relationship that I can't meet at the outset. And so, whether that's expectations around how often we're communicating or expectations around the ways in which I will be available, not available, I think sort of being very honest and open about sort of those expectations in any sort of relationship, if we're talking about a mentoring relationship or a friendship or an intimate relationship, just ensuring that the expectations at the outset are expectations that you can meet and expectations that you are willing to meet, if that makes sense.
I'll I'll, uh, I'll go off of that as well a little bit in terms of the golden rule, right? So treat others the way you would want to be treated, or do unto others as you would want to have done unto you. So when expectations aren't met, then what? Where's how do people handle that? And so one of the hardest things to do, I feel like, is giving the other person the benefit of the doubt versus jumping on top of them in terms of verbally to show your anger or disappointment. When you do that, you give that little bit of breathing room or ventability in that moment, and it could either end with a very good consequence. They'll get a chance to explain. They'll talk about what happened, and they dropped the ball, whatever it might be. Um, but it could even turn into a disaster. Spiral out of control. Everybody's anger levels go up and up because there is no. I guess that building of trust and rapport isn't there. if you have the building of that trust and rapport, there's a bigger chance that you're going to allow that ventability. If you've damaged the trust and rapport along the way, there's a higher chance you're not going to get that room or that benefit of the doubt from the other person. So, I mean, I feel like from a relationship standpoint, to me, that should be a constant goal. And it may be an up and down, right? You might have times in your life that the building is still coming up in terms of that rapport, and then there may be other times where you already got it, and now you can move forward and grow in other ways.
Really appreciate that, Dr. Patel. I think you're absolutely right. And when you were sort of talking about the benefit of the doubt, it really started getting me thinking about sort of, you know, who people are as they enter relationships. And I think sometimes I want to acknowledge that for some folks who have experienced trauma in relationships or other challenges, that it might be hard for them to sort of give that benefit of the doubt. And so working hard to sort of trust your gut and trust yourself and go slowly as you are moving into relationships can be really important. And so, like, I think we can trust ourselves to continue to give the benefit of the doubt, even after we've experienced some trauma. And I think there's work to be done there, but I just wanted to acknowledge that and add that even if you haven't had the best relationships in the past, even if you've experienced trauma, maybe starting to trust your gut slowly in the new people that you meet can be helpful sometimes.
That's great. I love those wholesome answers. So now I'm going to ask you a very unwholesome question. Um, red flags are how I think someone saying that a red flag for a person is that they admit that they abuse people. That's not a red flag. That's just someone you shouldn't be with, right? But a red flag is a very malleable term used amongst people. How real is that? And if you do believe it's a thing that people should watch for, personally or clinically, either one is fine with me. What are red flags to you that you would look for?
I think the most significant red flag that I look for both personally and that I talk with people about looking for professional in talk with clients about is dishonesty. I've found in my personal life, but mostly in my life with supporting clients in their relationship, is that when folks are sort of unable to be honest about really small things and sort of continue that pattern of dishonesty about sort of things that don't really matter, it's often a sort of signal that something else is going on. So I'd say that's a red flag in that you should check on it and sort of ask partners or friends like why they feel that they need to be dishonest, and sort of, you know, pinpoint it. And if it's sort of there's an inability to sort of come back and start to improve on that, I think that can be a really sort of challenging relationship to build upon.
I agree. Yeah, I feel like dishonesty probably that's a no go for me, right? So to me, lying is one of my pet peeves. So I feel like that's a quite a malicious act because you premeditatively thought through ways in which you wanted to deceive the other person. Um, I think the other no go for me, sorry, the other no go that is a no go for many, but may not be a true no go is things that are like being self centered. So if somebody came to me and said, "Hey, listen, one of my faults is that I am a self centered person." That could easily be a red flag, but it may not be a no go. It may be a challenge that they're willing to work on, to say, "Hey, I want to be less self-centered. I want to work on being able to observe courtesy to other people's views and other people's needs, rather than just focusing on mine first and then maybe others second." So I feel like there are certain red flags that are there, depending on who the person is, and maybe depending on prior relationships and traumas, that may not be a true no go. It might just be a red flag to say, "Oh, keep that in the back of your head," or say, "Is that something I can work with this person on?" And maybe that's something that could be a learning point for me. If I'm so not self centered, if I'm so skewed the opposite way, where everything's a yes, and I let people kind of walk on top of me, I might be able to learn something from that other person. So to me, I think those red flags are dependent on who the person is that's viewing them.
Yeah. one thing to add to that, Dr. Patel, as always, I love all the things that you say. It makes me think of new things. I think we're socialized to think that people don't change, right? Like we've heard that in a million different ways from a million different people. I can think of, you know, my mom saying that or other people saying that. And, I take exception to that as a clinical psychologist. Like I wouldn't be doing this. I'd be out of a job if I didn't think people can do better and be better and change and shift. And so I never want to say like a full no-go on things, or I try hard not to say a full no-go on things. And I like the way that Dr. Patel was sort of, inching towards the no-go, but not fully there on some things, because I do think that we can give people opportunities to do better and to be better. And so at the beginning of relationships, I'm often sort of inquisitive, like wondering sort of why people are behaving the way that they are, good, bad, and everything in between. Like, what's happening for you that you're not able to be honest? Like sometimes it's a really sort of valid answer. Every time I was honest when I was little, this happened. Or in my past relationship, every time I was honest, my partner jumped down my throat. So I learned not to be honest. But I'd like to be honest with you. And so I think sometimes, we might want to hang in there to be a little bit inquisitive. And I think that we all have to have a point at which a boundary has been crossed. And so we could talk more about that, but I think that those things are really important, and that, you know, being flexible in terms of people growing and doing better and being better and changing is reasonable.
I love the what kind of blossomed from this was not so much what we identify in other people, but our own boundaries and thresholds for ourselves. A red flag could not necessarily mean that someone is inherently bad. It just means that they aren't right because of the way that they interact with who we are. That I needed that. That was really helpful for me. So I feel like you both did a very good job at kind of changing the perspective and the way that we see red flags. I want to keep that energy with another thing that we hear constantly, which is I don't need to be with a broken person. They need to heal themselves first. And then, subsequently, the other side is saying, no, broken people can be healed by the person they're with, and that's why they're together. And I feel like it's very divisive between which one is correct, right? And I don't think that there is necessarily a correct answer. And I would love to get your all's perspective.
So, number one, I'm not quite sure who isn't broken, and maybe that not that that's a reflection about who I hang out with. I think it's a true reflection of people in general. I mean, most people have gone through some ups and downs in their life that they have struggled from, or are. I'm not going to maybe say traumatized by, but maybe scarred by, or they haven't fully healed on the inside with all of that. So to say that, oh well, I don't need to be with a broken person. I feel like um, unless they have the ability to see into the future, broken might be coming. They may not have had it, right, but broken might be coming. So I would much rather them focus on, is this person bringing some qualities to the table that I'm going to be able to gain from, and or am I bringing something to this relationship that the other person can then build off of, and we can then build on to the next step. That to me is much more beneficial to view, rather than just the person's historical facts, because that means something. It just doesn't mean everything.
Yep, I couldn't agree with you more. You literally took the words right out of my mouth. I do not know a person who hasn't experienced challenges, who hasn't struggled, who isn't struggling. I often say to clients, it would be shocking if you weren't struggling in the context of the world that we're living in right now. Like, it is a natural human reaction to be experiencing challenges. So I think that if we went into relationships with the idea that we shouldn't be with someone who is broken or has challenges or has experienced challenges, then no one would be in any relationships. The one thing that I will say is I think that it's important for us to be clear about the things that we can handle and the things that we can't, the boundaries that we have and the things that we choose to approach. And so I have conversations with clients all the time who are embarking on intimate relationships, marriages, friendships, around sort of like, what are the challenges you're experiencing in your relationship that your partner, and what are the challenges your partner is experiencing, And, where are your boundaries there? What do you need from them? Right. And we have all sorts of conversations. Like, I need my partner to be willing to work on X or Y or Z. I need my partner to be willing to go into outpatient therapy. I need my partner to be willing to set some concrete boundaries around X or Y or Z. And so, what I think, back to what Dr. Patel started with, I think communication about those challenges, maybe that brokenness. I don't love that word, but I'll keep using it because that's the word we started with. But if, as long as we're sort of making some choices with each other, I think it's reasonable for us to embark on relationships with people who are struggling. The one caveat to this is it's a lot of pressure to put on another person to suggest that they can fix you. And so I think that we want to be careful about embarking on relationships where we're putting all of our eggs in that basket of, like, this person can fix me, this person can show me the way, this person can be my everything. Like, I love my husband dearly, and he cannot give me all the things I need, right? It's important that I have other spaces like therapy and friends and, hobbies and things like that. So I think it's important for us to recognize that while our partners can support us in being well, can support us in thriving, that we have to be our strongest advocates. We have to commit to sort of the value of change, the value of movement towards the life that we want. And sometimes we'll falter, sometimes it'll be a sort of crooked line. But it's really important for us to not be sort of counting on our partners or our friends to fix us and to be the people who are driving the change in us.
Yeah, I think that mentality of kind of being able to pick and choose, like off of a menu or from a store shelf, this human versus that human. I feel like that mentality itself may need to be reassessed, because relationships are not just husband wife, spousal, partner to partner relationships. It could be your child, it could be your coworker, it could be multiple things, and these things are not necessarily by your choosing, right? This is going to potentially be just what it is. And so to be able to think like, oh, well, if it's broken, or then I just don't want to have anything to do with it, I can just push that aside. That may not be real. That may not be real in many arenas in your life. And if that's your approach, you're probably going to lose that relationship.
Absolutely. Like, I feel so, I talk about this so much in the context of my life and friends and clients, that it's really important to recognize where your boundaries are within the context of those relationships that aren't removable, right? There are all sorts of relationships that we have in our lives that we can't sort of cut the ties, right? That we have people in our lives for better or for worse. And we have to sort of be able to set some boundaries for our own wellness. And we can talk about this more, but I couldn't agree with you more. Like, how are you working in the context of that brokenness? Like, what do you need in order to be your best self with that person, in order to be well in the context of that relationship? And trying to sort of stick to that piece. Like, you can't help anyone if you're not well. And so it's really important to, stay sound in those boundaries.
I love all this because that's how I felt. And I just wasn't going to say it till you all said it. So now I'm on the same team that the professionals are. But I agree, mainly for the fact that you see it even outside of relationships. White flag. One of the biggest criticisms of white flag that we receive is, how are you going to let broken people help broken people? As if they were unable to function prior to arriving to the app, right? Like, of course they can function. That's why they need each other, because they have the experience necessary to help each other. And I love how, again, this continued theme of not overcomplicating the concept, of saying their past does not change the fact that you need to have a personal inventory for yourself and for what your expectations are from the person that you're with. Again, I think just the way that it sounds, you're with someone that has a history that's broken, would somehow change the way that you would come in a relationship. Again, I just don't think that we think about like that. I think the culture has changed the way that we think about it, and the simplistic way of breaking it down and saying still the same, I think is really important to hear. So I really appreciate that, guys. So gaslighting is a subject of conversation that recently on social media has taken a spotlight to. And we are constantly trying to spot it because, in a sense, it is malicious behavior that we do have to watch out for. But what I do see frequently is someone that simply disagrees with another person and says, no, you're wrong. And they say, you're trying to gaslight me on this subject, when in reality, it's just two people having a disagreement. As someone that is looking outwards and seeing gaslighting done to them or what they perceive it as, how do you go about breaking down that barrier of feeling like it's happening to you? And how do you tackle that and determine what it actually is, the conflict that you're experiencing?
Uh, well, I'll tell you, I'll base it off of an experience I had. It was, a post I had done. It was really in support of a friend who lost her husband. And she was trying to work on lobbying to find stricter rules for anesthesia to be done during dental procedures. And one of my good friends who I went to school with during when I was in medical school, she was in dental school. She she was very against that concept because it was going to create more regulations in her industry, and the whole end goal was about safety, right? So here we are on Facebook. There's constant back and forth, and I essentially just said, "Listen, I'm not going to have this argument on this platform with you. I'm happy to take it offline, and we can talk through it. But I think there's probably some pros and cons on both sides." And I just stopped with that. And it stopped. She did not respond back again because she knew also it was not the correct place for all of that to be for that to be said. Now, that one was a quite easy way to end it. I'm not so sure for a lot of like teen gaslighting issues that happen when there's personal your reputation almost basically is on the line, and they can essentially take you and push you and keep pushing with more and more momentum. I feel like that one's a little bit harder to push back against. I don't know that that kind of tactic would work. I would say try it. You always want to say, back in the day, you would just say, there's a fight happening, try to walk away from the fight, right? In the social media platform, that's not as easy to do because all the bystanders don't walk away. They all stay right there, and they continue to engage. So I would almost say that for you, if you're the one being gaslighted, the best you can do is remove yourself out of it, but try to build some tactics or people help find that help on the outside, actual human help, not media help, to be able to fight against.
Yes, this is just a very complex phenomenon, gaslighting, and it happens in so many different arenas. And I think by and large, we're still trying to figure out how to manage it. But I'll say just a couple of things. Particularly if you are a person who is being accused of gaslighting, and it's happening to you a lot frequently, that a lot of people have been accusing you of this thing. One thing to think about is sort of thinking about the consequences of your words, right? And how important it is to you to be right. Those two things feel so important to me because if Dave and I are having a conversation about something and I have an opinion that is different from Dave's, and the words that I'm using are hurting Dave deeply, how important is it for me to be right? And how important is it for me to care about and have empathy for Dave's emotions? And I think oftentimes we get so wrapped up, particularly on social media, as Dr. Patel was describing, we get so wrapped up in our opinions and being right that sometimes we have a hard time connecting with the person on the other side. And so if this is a relationship that is meaningful to you and you are being accused of gaslighting in that relationship, try to shift a bit to empathy. Try to shift a bit to thinking about the person on the other side and how the words you're using are sort of making them feel, right? And then think about whether you want to prioritize being right or whether you want to prioritize the relationship. Now, sometimes you might choose to prioritize being right, but I'd rather it be sort of a reflective decision as opposed to this sort of like reflexive, I have to be right, I have to be acknowledged to be right, like those types of things. Now, On the other side, if you are in a relationship where you're feeling like your partner or your friend or your colleague is perpetrating sort of gaslighting often, one thing to think about is how important is this relationship to you? And is the person you're talking to or the person you're engaging with prioritizing you and your emotions, or are they prioritizing being right? And so on the flip side, I think it's really important. Like it would, I have this, my husband might kill me for saying this, but I have these conversations with my husband all the time. Like maybe it's true that you're right in this situation, and the word that you used or the phrase that you used really hurt my feelings. So, like, that feels more important to me than you being right about sort of this mundane thing, right? So I think sometimes maybe we can, from our perspective of being gaslit, we can express it in that way, and sometimes people can take that in of like, we have differences of an opinion here, but it is really about sort of prioritizing the relationship. The last thing I'll say, sorry, go ahead.
I well, I was just going to say that well, let me
Okay,
let you say
the
your last
last
thing
thing
and then
that I
I'll say.
will say is that if your self-esteem or your value or your feeling of being a worthwhile human being is taking a hit in the context of your partner engaging in gaslighting behaviors, that's something to really think about. Like that's approaching red flag arena to me. Like if you're saying something about your experience as a human being, about your experience from your identity, and that person is just not able to hear it or take your perspective at all, that's, one of those things you really want to think about where your boundaries are there. So sorry, go ahead, Dr. Patel.
No, and I love that. And in fact, that plays right into what I was saying, which is, I it is gaslighting is very contagious, right? That it is contagious to roll right into that momentum and you be on that side to keep it moving. I wish that being a firefighter was just as contagious, right? You wish that there were people out there that very easily can see that this is a negative um, interaction. It surely should not continue. We are clearly beating up this human being verbally, um, but yet people don't seem to want to step in, right? We almost are all by, I don't know if it's by nature or just because our temptation is to keep that going, or maybe, hey, it's not my place to intervene. Or it's just easier to be a bystander than it is to be an activist and say, hey, this isn't okay, to make a stand for things. I wish it was more the other way, that making a stand was much more the contagious arena where you could have people easily congregate together. Boy, that would be so much more helpful. So Dave, I appreciate you bringing up the gaslighting subject, despite it being super complex, because I do think that there is a lot of teaching that we could probably do to help create more of those firefighters rather than more of the gaslighters of the world.
There's definitely a sense of self-preservation, right? If somebody sticks their hand in a fan, you don't stick yours in to retrieve them. Is the general mentality, right? Like it's already happening, and they need to figure it out, which just doesn't work. Just it doesn't work. There's hardly ever an eject button for the people in those interactions. Um, we've all been in fights where eventually, at some point, we knew we were wrong, but it's like I've already invested so much. At this point, I'm just going to keep being wrong because that's how my heart feels. Um, and it's, I appreciate the viewpoint of providing tactics for both someone that is being gaslit and someone that is gaslighting. Because again, sometimes it's not even intentional. Sometimes you do. I have I have a desire to be right. That's one of my traits that I work on, right? I do have a desire to be right. And sometimes, like for instance, if somebody is having a really negative reaction to a negative thing and I handle it much better, I will sometimes try to convince them that the negative thing isn't that bad, as a way to make them not react so intensely, when in reality it is that bad. They just have a different reaction than I do, and I am gaslighting on accident, right? So I think the ratio of being right to caring about what people think that's something everyone should consider anyway. But it definitely does help extinguish some of those behaviors.
I feel like we are so brave on social media in ways that are amazing and also in ways that can be problematic. And when you find yourself getting sort of tangled up in conversations on social media, I think it's important to think about whether or not you would behave this way in person. Like, how would you be talking to this person if you were sitting across a dinner table or if you were in a library together or having coffee or in public? Like, how would you want to feel about yourself in that communication? How would you want other folks to see you in that communication? Because I think sometimes some incredibly hurtful things are done and said in the context of social media in terms of gaslighting. And it's easy to sort of just shut the computer, right? Or put your phone down when you've created a lot of damage in somebody else's life. I think this is why we're seeing sort of uptick in suicide in our teens and young adults. And it's really important to me to be able to sort of express that. I'm raising two kids. I know y'all both are raising kids as well. And I just think it's really important for us to sort of try to create a society that takes a little bit more accountability for our behavior online and on social media platforms.
Definitely. It's it's and even in positive interactions, that's been a good indicator for me because I've talked to people online for months, sometimes years, colleagues and stuff that I'd never met before, and then you meet them, and there's just immediately a different chemistry about me, about how we interact. You know, even though we've had hundreds of conversations, and it's a dynamic that is a far greater part of our lives than I think any of us ever anticipated anyway. The mindfulness needed for that, I think, is really important. So we are an app for peer support, right? So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it here. I think peer support is an amazing tool to get us through a lot of life challenges, and I believe that a majority of the time we should be able to work with our partners in our relationships to overcome our personal relationship challenges. But there are plenty of people out there who use peer support to help them navigate these challenges, outside of the relationship. I need to step away. I need somebody else's opinion. I need to talk to somebody about how I feel. And how I feel, I can't talk to you about right now. So where is the line? Because some people say never bring your relationship stuff to anyone else ever. And some people say you need to have people that you can talk to about it. And sometimes they take it too far. So in your mind, professionally, personally, whatever, where is the medium between utilizing peer support to help gain mindfulness in the relationship and making sure that you save that kind of conversation for the person that actually matters most in the environment?
So one, I think white flag actually has the beautiful concept about it is that it's anonymous and you don't have to feel this fret of what if somebody else knows this about me, or what's happening in my house or my family or whatever, whatever it might be that you're needing a safe place to talk through, maybe to get advice, maybe to just vent. And so from that aspect, I think the design of white flag is actually amazing, as a resource. From the beginning of time, if somebody said, listen, you don't talk about relationships outside of the two people in the relationship, that's all you get to do and never goes anywhere else. I am not so sure that humans would have survived well. I'm sure they would have survived, but I'm sure they would not have survived well in terms of happy, healthy home interactions. Because I think from the beginning of time, people have always sought confidence of friends, or maybe somebody that was just a little removed outside of their circle, so they didn't feel it was too close, to talk through things with. So I'm personally not a believer that you don't talk about your relationship with anybody. I talk about my family and my interactions pretty regularly to all of you, and so I think that if you have, there are many people who do believe that they shouldn't, and they don't want to. They don't want to have that divulgence of their personal life into any arena outside of the home. I'm not so sure that's wrong. I think that's a personal preference. but I don't think it's a rule.
I couldn't, as usual, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's imperative, actually, for a relationship to thrive, to have folks outside of that relationship that you can go to, that you can process things with, that you might not be able to process with your partner in that moment, for any number of reasons. You know, the one thing I think that's also important is the flexibility in the folks who you use in that capacity, right? That I think, there are things that folks might talk with their therapist about that they might not talk with, someone who's in relation to you and your partner, right? That your therapist can sort of be that objective lens who's outside of your life in that way. You might have friends to talk to who have like a sort of different perspective. I think you really want to be careful, in doing this, to think about the consequences of talking to folks outside of your relationship about what's going on inside of your relationship. I'm not saying there are always consequences, but sometimes there are, right? Sometimes you might talk with somebody about what's happening in your relationship and they might sort of bring it back up to you in a way that feels uncomfortable, or they might bring it up to your partner in a way that sort of you don't feel comfortable with. So you really want to think about who you trust and how you trust them, and sort of be sure about sort of like what you need in the context of sharing these things with someone. Like sometimes I say to my friends, like, I just need to vent. I'm not looking for advice. And that's okay. Or sometimes I very clearly say I need advice here. And so I think we can be really clear about sort of the boundaries around what we're sharing and how we're sharing it. And I also try really hard, I'm maybe not always successful with this, but I really try hard not to denigrate my partner in those conversations in a way that feels unfair or yucky, or in a way that feels like inappropriate, right? Like I try not to do those things, because I value him and I love him, and I think that that's really important. The last thing I'll say is that there is a socialization about marriage, about partnerships, that they should be perfect and that they should appear to be perfect. And I think that has done all of us such a significant disservice in the context of our relationships, because we are experiencing things alone. And when I talk to friends about their marriages, like I hear a lot of things that I really connect with. It makes me feel less alone. It makes me feel more motivated to sort of work on my relationship. It helps me sort of contextualize the things that I'm going through with my partner in the sort of broader scheme of relationships. So I think talking about relationship challenges is a really healthy way to engage in your own relationship, and I really encourage it, with the caveat of being sort of boundaried with it.
I think this can be even looking at relationships. If you're within a big organization, um, you can get kind of stuck in your own little silo, right? You only know kind of what's happening in your own four walls. And here, right down the street, same organization, same business type, but not your office, it's somebody else's office. Here they are running the same business, but they're doing it in a whole different way, or they found these really effective things that have been, quite helpful. And unless you're able to communicate that across, to even either ask or just create those moments where those conversations can happen, I think you'll find that if you just stayed in your silo, that path can be a little bit challenging. It can be lonely. You might be frustrated, and you might look back later to say, boy, I really could have done that a little differently if I would have just decided to talk to somebody else. So, it comes with a consequence, though, right? Even from a business standpoint, which is what I think Jess is saying is that you have to be smart about what you're saying, and you have to be smart about how you present yourself. So, if you're, denigrating your partners or your spouse or whoever it might be, that group may walk away from you thinking, boy, what a terrible person. She really was just talking trash about the other person. Even though you thought you were actually kind of gaining some rapport with them to make them all believe you were somehow a victim in whatever it was that you were complaining about. So I think you just have to be really smart about how you portray yourself, portray what you're trying to really gain after. Even from a venting situation, you're not venting because you just want to make the other person look bad. You're venting because you're frustrated and you need some space to get all those thoughts out, and even if it doesn't turn into an advice.
Yeah, I just have a little bit of an anecdote to add to this as we round out this question. I have a group of really close friends that I grew up with who I often have these conversations with, and we have sort of this unspoken rule that like we never bring it up in front of the partners, and we don't treat the partners poorly because of anything we're saying. But I often reach out when I'm in an argument with my husband or when we've had a disagreement, and I reach out for calibration. They're honest with me. Like, they'll say, Jess, that was out of line, or Jess, you're not wrong. You should sort of die on this hill. They'll give me sort of that calibration, that honest calibration that I need. So I think we all need those people in our lives to really sort of support us in our relationships and calibrate us.
Yes, definitely. I have a couple, and I I would not have made it as far as I did with some of the things that I made it far with without those people, right? The Something I try to tell myself and anybody else that's vents to me about their partners is, as soon as you're done, go tell your partner everything you just said. And if you say, you know what, yeah, I'm going to do that. That's probably because you have a really constructive conversation and you had some time to self reflect. And if you say, I'm absolutely not, well, then that's something to consider as well. If you wouldn't say it to them, why do think about why you said it? Because chances are there's something that you should probably work on in that big mess that you spilled out, right? And I found there's a lot of times where I didn't want to say something back, and I'm like, I need to figure out why. So I really love the advice here. I think, again, taking care with how you approach that is something that a lot of people forget, that I have forgotten. So I appreciate that as an outlook. So we're about out of time here, but I did want to ask one final question. Of course, White Flag, our goal is to provide basic human connection to everyone, anonymous connection, real connection, support from one person to another. Relationships is about as intimate and personal and peer related as it gets. How can someone utilize White Flag in terms of how it involves with their relationship and use it as a support system there?
I mean, I think our sort of motto is that you're not alone. And I think that sometimes when we're in the context of relationships and we don't feel like we have anyone to reach out to, we feel very alone. I talk to clients about this all the time who feel like they don't have anyone to talk to who won't be judgmental, who won't judge their situation. And every time I'm on the app, supporting someone, talking with someone, connecting with someone, I don't feel alone. And I think that that is true for our users broadly. That White Flag is a way to help us not feel so alone in the relationship challenges that we're experiencing, and the ups and the downs and anything in between. In any moment, we can go on there and ask a question. We can just sit and chat with somebody who might be going through something similar in a relationship that they're having, who might be able to give us some ideas about how we might sort of manage the situation that's going on in our relationship. And as Dr. Patel said, it's anonymous. So it's not like we are sort of outing a person who hasn't, consented to being outed. We're talking to somebody who can be there for us in a way where there are no strings attached and no consequences. So I love the idea of White Flag. I love engaging with people on the app, and I think that engaging with folks around our relationships can also make our relationships stronger.
I agree. And, I think that engagement will help lead you to find different points of view. And I think by you hearing and or seeing those different points of views, you may realize that the other person in the relationship that you may be having a struggle with may have some standing, or you might have created a new understanding for why they feel the way they feel, or why they the way they do, or why they're so strongly set in their ways. Because they also may not be alone, right? So they also might other people that are very much just like them, and it doesn't have to always turn into a right and a wrong. There are many flavors and ways to kind of slice this pie to understand that the qualities and traits that people bring to the table may be very great ones. They may not be your strong suits, and therefore you may not really understand them all that well. You may not even value them very much because you don't feel like that's the most important thing. You think there are other ways that we should be doing this. But I feel like there's so I think if by using the app, I think you'll be able to gain access to simply talk through things with another person and maybe even learn a thing or two about why it is the person thinks the way they do or acts the way they do, maybe has expectations the way they do, because those expectations may also be the same expectations as others have.
Terrific. Yeah, a lot of the things we discussed today, I'm kind of summarizing a lot of the positive factors of human relationships that we've discussed. Things like a desire for communication and trust, a lack of bias, the ability to walk away and come back. All of these things, not only tie into peer support, but into how WhiteFlag is utilized, right? To be able to come to the table and say, I am in a relationship with somebody that I want to be with, but right now I need to just be somewhere else. And a lot of times we don't have those options. We don't have those people to talk to. We don't have people without bias. We don't have that solution. So it's great to see that WhiteFlag can do that for people when it comes to this subject matter. So Dr. Roshni Patel, Dr. Jessica LoPresti, thank you guys again so much for coming on here, chatting with me. As always, I learned a boatload. I'm going to go think about it today. Thank you guys so much for taking the time, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, Dave.